it works. We see more and more. Things are only going to go faster now. It started slow, but then it starts going quickly. We've got one of the guys that's running the Mineralogist publishes this book, which is The Art of Gem Cutting Complete. This is basically all the stuff that they had found for like the last 6 years, and they had been publishing it serially in the magazines. They put it all together. So pretty similar to what we saw with the J. Harry Howard book. It's kind of like, we're going to just collect everything that we figured out, all of our experiment notes, we're going to put it together into an easy-to-read format, and you can buy it and learn how to cut gems at your house. So that's one of the authors. The other author publishes Quartz Family Minerals, which is not a gem cutting book, but it does have a small section about how to cut quartz. So we can see that, it's spreading. If nobody was interested in gems and gem cutting, people wouldn't write these books because no one would buy them and it would be pointless. So we can tell just by the fact that more books are existing, demand is growing. Now, again, just to put some context in here of where we're at in the world, World War II. Now, World War II has a bigger impact on gem cutting than World War I did, because World War I happened when there wasn't really a gem cutting thing happening, right? It was still just the early days. It was more just about collecting the knowledge and getting articles and stuff. World War II, gem cutters have to go to war. They have to leave. Also, they were collecting resources. You couldn't just make a bunch of faceting machines during this time because they needed metal for the war effort. Lots of people that would have been new cutters had to go to war. And also, and I think we can all relate to this, the stress of the time was not conducive to beginning a new hobby. People were just so frazzled and freaked out, just like today, except for I think today actually is a good time to start gem cutting because we're at home, or we have been at home. The community did not really grow during the war, but it is funny because we do see, there's a bunch of articles like these three where, there's like some direct relationships between gem cutters and the war. And I know that some of the lapidary shops that I've talked to in London were making stuff for the war effort. They'd be making ball bearings out of agates, and they'd be making scales that they would be using for one thing or another. So they actually did quite a bit of work, not in America, but just to say there's definitely was a connection between gem cutting and World War II. But the other cool thing, and this is sort of happening after the war, there's so many technological advances that happened during World War II. Diamond-plated grinding wheels were developed, and that came into gem cutting later. Centered diamond wheels were developed, that came into gem cutting later. Resinoid-bonded diamond wheels, that came into gem cutting later. And then also, this is an interesting side effect, you take all of these potentially interested gem people and you send them to gem countries all over the world, like Burma and Australia and Sri Lanka and Brazil, and they all come back home with a pocket full of stones, wanting to know, and of course I'm sure that they're all coming back with PTSD and they need some cathartic mental exercises to do. They want to do something creative because they've been doing crazy stuff for a while. They all come back home with all these gems, and then suddenly it's like a boom. You got new technology, you got a whole bunch of people that want to do it, they've got stones, and they've been seeing stones, so they're coming home gem conscious. They even people that never saw stones before, maybe saw them for the first time in the places where they were stationed, and whenever they come back, we see that the Lapidary Club scene, or the whole community, sort of exploded. And to meet the demand of that explosion, we see yet another, not a new magazine, but a new column. So Desert Magazine, which was, as far as I can tell, was a magazine about the lifestyle of desert people. It was like, maybe even for Tucson people, it was like living in an RV and having cactuses, and then suddenly they're having this thing about gem cutting. So they start doing their monthly column, and this is Leland Quick. So he's writing the column. He's later going to start Lapidary Journal, but for now he's just a columnist. And so now we've got the Mineralogist magazine, we've got Rocks and Minerals, and we've got Desert magazine. So we can kind of understand that the community is big enough to support 3 different ventures, and they all continue for years and years and years. So it wasn't a failure. So like I said, the new technology from World War II is coming. The people are back, the metal shortage is over, and people have been having all kinds of ideas. Whoever had machines before is ready to upgrade it, make a new one, get a new idea. And this is a crazy time. If we look at the 40s, the early 40s or the late 40s, there's so many machines. Like there must be 50 different machines that you could get at this time. All of them are small. I mean, the ones I pictured here are the ones that we can remember. That's why I showed them to you. But there's so many more. The Orcott, the Featherweight, the O'Brien. Actually, there's an O'Brien over there. I can show you when we're done. The Taylor. Most of those ones have been forgotten. There's so many that have been forgotten or just outclassed, outdated. Some of the old ones, like even the Taylor. I mean, this isn't very different than some of the early ones we saw, but probably today, not many people are using the Taylor. There's no reason why. It seems to be pretty good. It has the angle, the index. The later ones have a cheater. It has the height thing. The O'Brien's quite weird. It's like maybe the first handpiece, but it's just an 8-sided disc. And again, you guys can check that one out later. And then the MDR, I'm sure you guys know about Graves, but maybe you guys know about the MDR. That one came in the middle of the 1940s. That was really like the first big, mass manufactured machine that you could buy. And that continued all the way on until the early 2000s. So that was like a really successful company that just kept going. And same as Graves. I mean, Graves technically still exists. So we're seeing that the seeds of today, they've begun, and some of the stuff from then still exists today. And then the culmination of the whole thing, Leland Quick. Not only is he writing his Desert Magazine article, he starts writing Lapidary Journal in 1947. So for a while, he's doing 2 magazines at the same time. And as we move into the late 1940s, the community is just growing and growing and growing. More people are joining the hobby each year. The clubs, the lapidary clubs, more clubs are growing. I think if you look at like the years that all the clubs started, like not very many started in the 30s. More started in the 40s, but after the 40s, there's so many clubs, like they're everywhere. And so, Lapidary Journal comes out, and the Lapidary Journal continued, well into the 1990s, and then was bought and rebranded as the Lapidary Journal Jewelry Artist, and that just stopped during COVID. Like they literally just stopped a few months ago. So 73 years, Lapidary Journal ran, so that's a pretty good run. Rest in peace, Lapidary Journal. And so, of course, the more magazines you have, the more people that are talking about it, the more clubs, the more shows. Of course, the more people are going to find it. So the more stuff that we see being born, the more people come into it, and they're also figuring out, new techniques, new designs, new philosophies, and that leads into what I would call the golden age, 1947 to 1975. This is when we just see, it's crazy. You can't even describe it. It's everything. Everything that we know of today is from this period of time. All the machines that we have today came from then. All the magazines, all the knowledge, all the books, everything. And so this is where I'm going to stop for today. This is kind of, it's another chapter that would take a whole other hour to talk about. But, from this period, we see this concept of the mass machine. It spreads to England, it spreads to Australia. We've got, obviously now we know that there's lapidary clubs in Australia. They challenge, they do the national challenges or the competitions. The UK had a very big club scene, not as big as America, but they really followed suit in what we were doing here. And now it's interesting to see the development, because the mass machine, while it hasn't really taken over as far as gem cutting production for the jewelry trade, if anybody would look into gem cutting today, the first thing they're going to find is this. Like, you're not going to find YouTube videos about gem cutting, probably, I don't think, unless they're from me. So this is, this is the result of the whole thing. Like, J. Harry Howard writes this thing, everyone's writing letters, and then eventually the whole world has changed. And so I want to just leave my final slide as a thank you to the pioneers that helped us get to where we are today. So Lauren Merrill, Marcher, Peter Zodak, who did Gems and Minerals, Frank Wade, who did his series and then his book, J. Harry Howard, who wrote his pamphlet, then his articles, then his book. Dake, who did the Mineralogist, Fred Young, who did the Mineralogist, and Leland Quick, that did Desert Magazine and Lapidary Journal. Without these guys, we would not be standing here today. I would have no story, and we would not be in a club right now, because nobody would have been able to organize without these magazines, without these letters, and without the people that were just sharing, which to me is the ultimate principle of this whole community. It's all about sharing, which is why I did my book, The Secret Teachings of Gem Cutting. The whole idea is, to me, I'm looking at Howard. He was the guy. He said, well, I'm just going to find out everything I know, and I'm going to give it to you in this book. And that's exactly what I try to do with my book. I'm going to go around the world and meet gem cutters everywhere I can find the designs, look at what's there, and I'm going to just put it out there, because otherwise it's lost forever. If these guys wouldn't have wrote down all this stuff, I couldn't have found it. I couldn't tell it to you guys today, and we wouldn't know all the struggles that they were dealing with that led to the knowledge that we're using when we teach people how to cut gemstones in the Lapidary Plus today. So these guys, and obviously there's so many more, but these are the central pillars that the whole entire community is resting upon, whether we know it or remember it or not. So I just want to give my own thanks to these guys. And I want to give thanks to you guys for letting me chat with you for the duration of this presentation. I have a bunch of old machines. I thought it would be fun to bring them in. I've been collecting them during my trip. So I've got a little table over there if you guys want to check it out, with a bunch of archaic machines, including the MDR. That's or the O'Brien. I mean, this is Mr. O'Brien himself with his machine, watching someone use one of the new MDRs. So this is kind of just a nice little relic of the past. And if you guys are interested in going deeper, you can take a picture of this slide, and there's some interesting books that you might find. Also, if you want to go deeper in the history, I've got tons of articles and videos on my website, and I also have a book over there. So thank you guys so much, and if there's any questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, we can chat. And, I wanted to say this. If this has spurred some interesting stories in your mind, I've got a video camera in the kitchen, and I would love to sit down and talk to anybody that wants to tell me a story about what they remember about the olden days or the modern days of gem cutting. So let's do that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Justin. Yeah, it was a lot of great history.
It was a whirlwind, sorry.
No, that was really well presented, and I had no idea that we were, over here so different from European cutting.
Yeah, it's a whole different mental approach, really. They think about it in a totally different way. Obviously, the technology is really different, and their aesthetic is also just totally different. For them, it's so funny. I talk to some of those old London cutters, and I will ask them, like, what do you think about like American cutting or even like fantasy cutting? And they're just like, they told me it looks synthetic. To them, it's like the flashiness of a brilliant cut. To them, they don't associate that with real stones.
Interesting.
I mean, that's just their own training.
And vice versa from here.
Exactly. But no, it's just funny to hear their views, because their whole training has just put them into such a different mindset that they just don't see it the way we do. And of course, they don't approach it the way we do.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
And
questions?
I've got a question about the machine that Mr. Merrill made.
Yes.
He said that there was no adjustment for height.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it long enough. I didn't see the picture long enough, but for an instant I thought that I saw like a button on the back of the machine where it goes on the book. Could it be possible that it was telescopic?
Could be. Actually, those machines still exist too. I'm going to go see them in July. They're still in Maine. They're in basically the let's just say 4 generations or so later. There's some jewelry shops that have those machines. So I'll know more about that later this year, and I can tell you for sure, because I'm going to see them, the older ones and the newer ones, because I think one of those wooden ones still exists. So I'm not totally sure, because those pictures are from the 1930s, so they're pretty grainy and hard to see.
I
But
was thinking they'd have to have some kind of way. I mean, they lift up the rotating disc, or maybe they just
Well, you know,
push the thing down? And-
What I was thinking about, because like in Thailand, there's one kind of gem cutting machine that they use. It's a handpiece. It's kind of like a diamond handpiece. It just sits on this glass plate, and they don't have any height adjustment either. So whenever they tilt, let's just say they put their angle at this. Let's say let's say it says 35 if there was such a number on there. But when they start cutting in the stone, of course, it changes as the height goes down. And I just imagine that's how theirs did too. They didn't have probably absolute numbers. Like even if their machine said 35, of course, as the stone gets smaller, the angle's changing. And there wouldn't have been, if there's no height, there can't be a stop. You know, so it just has to go to the lap. So I assume that's how it worked. Like they just eyeballed it and there was no stops or anything. It just kept cutting until the stone was gone. I assume. I'm not totally sure, but I'll tell you in July.
It's interesting to look at, you know.
Yeah.
It's not, it's possible that it was that way, but. You know.
No, it could be. And yeah, Maine is another place that I'm super excited about. Like there's at least 4 machines up there. I'm going to spend a week with Derek, who I think you were here earlier. I'm going to spend a week with him and we're just going to go around and look at all these old machines and try to get the stories of the old cutters. They have quite a unique history up there and they're pretty aware of it, but I don't think they realize how special it is because they're not aware of how different it is from the rest of, to them it's just like old stuff from their great grandparents. And I'm just like, this is a lost chapter of American gem cutting, and they don't have any idea, so I'm going to tell them. So it should be fun.
Very cool.
Yeah. Anybody else? Or otherwise I can talk to you guys over at the table. Cool.
Great.
Thank you guys.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it.
We'll do a couple drawings real quick.